Mia Langley once believed in the beautiful things people called destiny. She used to think that if she were kind, hardworking, and capable of loving with all her heart, then love would come and stay. That belief grew with her over the years, through the romantic novels she edited, and eventually settled into a quiet hope she carried deep within her chest. When she married Nathaniel Reed, a successful, handsome lawyer praised by the media as the golden gentleman of the legal world, she thought she had finally caught her dream. He said all the right things, made everyone around them believe he loved her. Most importantly, he made Mia believe it was real. 2 years later, that belief was cracking. One silent, sleepless night at a time. Nathaniel had never truly touched her. No longing in his eyes, no necessary embrace, not a single kiss that made her heart stir. He was her husband by law, but in every moment that passed, Mia felt like a forgotten shadow in her own life. From the outside, they were the perfect couple, a powerful lawyer and a talented editor living in a luxury high-rise in the heart of San Francisco. They appeared in magazines, smiled at charity galas, and made others envy their dream marriage. But behind the closed doors of their apartment, Mia lived in silence and distance. No one knew that behind her soft smile was a heart slowly fading under the weight of being unseen. She couldn't remember when she stopped dreaming. She no longer counted anniversaries, no longer waited for a warm embrace late at night. And somewhere along the way, she realized her dream had never been real. She had only been living in the illusion she created, a story she had written for herself, but one that was never truly hers. Mia used to think maybe she just wasn't enough. Maybe she was too quiet, too soft, not alluring enough to hold Nathaniel's heart. She tried to change, learned to cook, read the books he liked, wore the elegant dresses he once complimented. She molded herself into the perfect wife by every standard, but he remained as distant as a winter shadow. Nathaniel never yelled. He was never cruel with his words, but his silence, that was the sharpest blade. He came home late, blaming endless meetings. Some nights he didn't come home at all. When she asked, he simply said, there was a late case. No apology, no guilt in his eyes. Mia began sleeping alone more often than not. In their spacious bed, she lay still, listening to the ticking clock, a cruel reminder of the loneliness swallowing her whole. She once dreamed of a family, of falling asleep wrapped in the arms of someone who loved her. What she got was emptiness, an invisible void she could never seem to fill. Many times she wanted to ask him outright, "Do you still love me?" But she was afraid of the answer, afraid of the truth, afraid to face that maybe everything was a performance. Then one evening, a night like any other, Nathaniel forgot his phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message. Mia had never been one to invade someone's privacy, but something made her stop. The text read, "Last night was amazing. I can still feel you on me." Her hand trembled as she picked up the phone. It wasn't just one message. It was an avalanche. Dozens of conversations, different names, words of love, hunger, passion, words never meant for her. Each word felt like a blade, cutting deeper than she thought possible. And suddenly everything clicked. The late nights, the distracted glances, the indifference. Nathaniel hadn't just betrayed her. He had stolen 2 years of her life with a lie that wore a wedding band. When he walked into the kitchen, catching her blank stare, he raised an eyebrow, like none of it mattered. "Something wrong?" She threw the phone at him. Her voice shook, but there was power behind it. "How could you do this to me?" He looked at the screen, then shrugged. No shame, no remorse. "Did you really think I married you for love?" That question shattered everything. Then, "Why?" she whispered, fists clenched so tight her nails bit into skin. He sighed as if bored by the entire confrontation. "My father thought it was good PR. A polished wife looked better on paper. And you were easy to manage. Those words hurt more than any silence ever had. She had never been his love, just his convenience. But this time, the pain didn't turn into tears. It turned into clarity. Mia didn't say another word. She packed her things, each shirt, each book, without a single ounce of regret. Nathaniel didn't stop her. No apology, not even a glance. As the door closed behind her, Mia knew she was never coming back. Mia's new apartment sat on the third floor of an old red brick building in the Mission District, a place for quiet artists, people starting over, and those carrying wounds they never spoke about. The space was small, just big enough for one. Gone were the sweeping city views, the open glass windows, and the polished hardwood floors of her old life. Now all she had was a narrow window overlooking a quiet courtyard scattered with fallen leaves. She painted the walls a soft ivory, hung an abstract painting above the couch. Not particularly beautiful, but one she had chosen. Everything in her home was hers. A worn armchair from the flea market, chipped porcelain plates that still felt elegant, and a simple wooden bookshelf holding the novels that once comforted her in her youth. There was nothing luxurious, but everything breathed freedom, a kind of peace she never had living with Nathaniel. But freedom didn't mean happiness. Each night, as the city fell into quiet, Mia would sit at her small kitchen table, fingers curled around a cup of tea gone cold. There were no footsteps echoing in the hallway, no doors opening late, no cold glances exchanged across a marble kitchen counter. And yet the absence hurt more than the presence ever did. Some nights she cried without knowing why, as though her body needed to release all the sorrow she had carried in silence. She wondered, did I make the wrong choice? If I had held on a little longer, would things have changed? But then she'd remember the void in his eyes, the unread texts full of passion meant for others. The answer was always there. Her heart just didn't want to see it. By day, Mia wrote, not for deadlines, not for editors, but because if she didn't write, she might forget how to breathe. The first sentences were shaky, fragmented, just like her. But page by page, word by word, a piece of her returned. She didn't hide the pain. She poured it into her work, made space for it, gave it form, because only by facing it could she hope to heal. She wasn't searching for a grand new beginning. She didn't believe someone would magically come and pull her out of the darkness. Mia just wanted one full day. A day where she didn't have to fake a smile or wear armor to survive. Her life was quiet now, like a sad but beautiful melody. She walked through the park each morning, paused outside a used bookstore near her building, let her fingers trail across worn spines and pages aged by time. Those small things, fragile as they were, reminded her that she was still here, still trying. She didn't know where the road would lead, or if she'd ever feel whole again. But she knew one thing. She had walked away from something that broke her, and that alone was enough to begin. And then, on an ordinary day, a morning like any other, fate returned, not loud, not glamorous, just a chance encounter with a face she had almost forgotten. Mia hadn't expected anything different that day at the book exhibit. She went because it was on her calendar, because an old colleague had extended the invitation, and because she thought surrounding herself with fellow literature lovers might ease the heaviness that lingered in her chest. She never imagined that fate would choose such a quiet moment to bring the past back, almost silently. He stood near the far corner of the gallery, tall, poised, with dark brown hair swept back neatly, his gaze calm and calculating. Still composed, still observant, but more refined now. Asher Hale, CEO of Hale Digital. The man Mia had met briefly at a publishing seminar 3 years ago. Back then, he had been just a guest speaker, successful, magnetic, the kind of man who pulled attention without asking for it. They exchanged a few polite words, business cards, and walked away to separate lives. But Mia remembered his eyes, the way he had looked at her, like he saw something others overlooked. And now, here he was again. She kept her expression polite, her posture steady. But Asher looked at her differently, like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than she could imagine. Mia Langley. He spoke her name slowly, almost like he was trying to taste the weight of it. Asher Hale. News travels fast, she replied, keeping her voice even as she felt the heat of his gaze anchoring her. I heard about the divorce. His tone wasn't curious. It was something quieter, like he had known all along. Mia nodded. Things don't stay private for long in our world. Asher didn't respond right away. He studied her, not in the invasive way she had grown used to, but with a kind of calm knowing. Then after a pause, he exhaled, as if coming to a decision. Come work for me. Mia blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. What? I need someone I can trust. You need a new beginning. His voice was steady, calm, but underneath it carried something deeper. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to say no, that she didn't need saving. But as he looked at her, there was no pity in his eyes, just clarity, like he saw her more fully than she had seen herself in months. I don't need someone to rescue me, she said slowly, deliberately. Asher smiled, not soft, not charming, but in a way that stole her breath. Maybe not, but you do need someone who sees that you're still standing. Mia's chest tightened. Something in those words made her feel lighter. There were no promises, no lingering touches or smoldering glances. Just an honest offer from a man who had once seen her, truly seen her, before she even realized she was fading. She didn't give an answer right away, but as she left the exhibit hall, her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear, but because for the first time in months, something inside her had shifted. A door had quietly begun to open. A few days later, she called him. Just 3 words. I'll take it. And when she hung up, her heart still trembled, not out of fear of moving forward, but because she knew she wasn't healed yet. But this time, she didn't expect herself to be perfectly whole, just brave enough to try again, to begin, even with the scars still resting quietly inside her. Working under Asher Hale wasn't like anything Mia had experienced before. He wasn't loud. He wasn't commanding in the way most powerful men were. He didn't need to raise his voice or assert his title. People listened to him because his silence carried more weight than other speeches. He observed everything, not to control, but to understand. He spoke only when necessary, but when he did, it mattered. And with Mia, he never crossed any lines. No flirtation, no lingering touches. And yet something was different, something unspoken, not loud, not visible, but palpable. She tried to ignore it at first, told herself, this is work, nothing more. But the way he looked at her, longer than necessary, deeper than expected, cracked through her logic like sunlight through a weakened wall. He gave her more projects, kept her in meetings longer than others, found excuses to ask her to stay late. Once when she stepped out of a conference room, she caught his eyes on her from across the hall. That look wasn't professional. It was restrained hunger, carefully buried under layers of control. Mia felt it too. Every time he passed by, the air shifted. There were nights when only the 2 of them remained in the office, and the silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was a challenge, a confession neither had spoken yet. One evening, as she focused on finalizing a manuscript, she felt him behind her. No footsteps, no greeting, but she knew he was there, felt his breath, close enough to awaken every nerve in her skin. If I were your husband, I'd never let you sleep alone. His voice was low, a whisper barely brushing the edge of sound. Mia froze, Her heartbeat stalled. Those words, simple, dangerous, honest, struck straight through her carefully guarded composure. Slowly, she turned to face him. Asher, she barely breathed his name before he stepped forward. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with quiet certainty, as if he had waited too long to move too fast. He stopped just in front of her, eyes locked with hers. Say my name again, he whispered. Mia couldn't breathe. She should have stepped back. She should have drawn a line. But she stood still, not because she was weak, but because she was done pretending she didn't feel what was real. When his lips met hers, it wasn't gentle. It was a declaration, a surrender, a flood of everything held back for far too long. His hands framed her face like she was something precious, irreplaceable. She should have stopped it. She should have pulled away. But instead, Mia kissed him back, with everything she had left. Because for the first time in a very long time, she felt wanted. And more dangerously than that, she wanted him too. The Hale digital book launch was held in an elegant venue, warm lighting, dancing off wine glasses, and curated smiles of the publishing elite. Mia walked in wearing a simple, fitted black dress, her hair softly draped over her shoulders, her gaze steady. She was no longer the woman who trailed behind a man. She walked beside Asher, and even the way he looked at her was enough to draw the room's attention. But fate, or perhaps irony, always knew when to test someone's strength. When Mia stepped away to greet a former colleague, a familiar voice sliced through the hum of conversation behind her. Moved on quickly, didn't you? She turned. Nathaniel stood there, polished, charming, with that half smile she once thought was irresistible. Now it just looked hollow. Barely divorced and already in someone else's arms. Or was he around before it ended? Mia tightened her grip on her wine glass. Not out of rage, but because the insult no longer cut. It made her feel something unexpected. Pity. Not for herself, for him. Before she could respond, a warm hand touched her lower back. Asher, she's none of your concern anymore, Reed. His voice was calm but laced with quiet steel. Nathaniel chuckled darkly. You know, Asher, when I left, she was still a virgin. The room stilled for a moment. Mia's breath caught. Her chest clenched at the cruelty of the comment. But Asher didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her, gently, reassuringly, and then turned back to Nathaniel, his arm sliding protectively around her waist. That just means she was always meant to be mine, he said, then leaned down and kissed Mia. Not rushed, not possessive, but deliberate, certain, a statement. When he pulled back, his eyes never left Nathaniel. And I don't need to compare myself to anyone to know that's true. Nathaniel had nothing more to say. He turned and disappeared into the crowd, but the taste of defeat lingered in the air long after he was gone. Mia let out a soft breath. Her heart still raced, but this time not from pain, from something far more powerful. For the first time in her life, someone had truly defended her, and she had let him. Asher had never been a man who rushed things. He was deliberate in his choices, measured in his actions. But from the moment Mia looked at him without hesitation or fear, just quiet trust, he knew he wouldn't wait much longer. Not because he was impatient, but because she was finally ready to be loved. That weekend, he took her to Big Sur, where the towering redwoods met the jagged cliffs of the Pacific, where time slowed and the world fell away. The cabin they stayed in was tucked deep into the woods, secluded and silent, with no cell reception, no meetings, no alarms. Only wide-open skies, whispering trees, and two people slowly peeling away the final layers of their armor. From the moment they arrived, Asher showed Mia a kind of care she hadn't known she'd been missing. He remembered she didn't drink coffee in the afternoon, so he brewed chamomile tea for her as the sun dipped low behind the trees. He'd packed the gray wool shawl she once admired during a winter meeting, though she only mentioned it in passing. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. Every action spoke volumes. He noticed her. He remembered. He listened. And Mia felt it. All of it. Not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the way he tucked her hair behind her ear before she even noticed the wind had blown it, in how he always made sure her book light was charged, in how he looked at her like she wasn't just important. She was his world. Each morning started slow, gentle, with warm tea, shared silence, and a softness Mia never thought she could have. Each evening ended with quiet conversations by the fire, books exchanged wordlessly, and a peace so full she often caught herself smiling without realizing it. That afternoon, they sat side by side on a weathered wooden bench on the balcony, Mia wrapped in a blanket, a glass of red wine cradled in her hands. The sky was shifting into hues of gold and coral, the sun dipping low into the Pacific as waves kissed the cliffs below. "I didn't think I'd fall in love again," Mia murmured, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Asher turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "I don't think this is falling in love again. I think this is the first time you're being loved the right way." She let out a breath of laughter, light but tinged with something deeper. Her eyes glistened. "I still have so many scars." He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for her hand, brushing his thumb gently across her knuckles. "I'm not here because you're perfect. I love you because you're real, because you're still standing after everything. And I just want to be the one who touches you, without adding more pain." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not so simply, not so honestly. Asher stood, disappearing briefly inside the cabin. When he returned, he held a small box in his hand. And then, without a word, he dropped to one knee in front of her. Mia's breath caught. Inside the box was a ring, delicate, understated. A slender band of gold with a soft, glowing sunstone that mirrored the light now spilling across the balcony. "Mia Langley," he began, his voice steady, low, filled with warmth. "Marry me. Not because it's what comes next, not because it's expected, but because we both know, you and I, that we belong to each other, that you're my home, and I want to be yours." She couldn't speak. Her chest ached in the most beautiful way. It wasn't surprise that silenced her. It was rightness, the kind that made her afraid to even breathe, afraid that saying it aloud might break the spell. "I don't want just a part of your life. I want all of it. I want to wake up next to you, to hear all the small things you say, and to love you, not the way others did it wrong, but the way you've always deserved to be loved, with care, with respect, with certainty." Tears slipped down Mia's cheeks. She didn't wipe them. They weren't tears of sadness. They were the release of every lonely night, every silent ache, every moment she thought this kind of love wasn't meant for her. She nodded, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I will." Asher smiled, a slow, breathtaking smile that lit up his entire face. He slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her gently into his arms. In his embrace, Mia felt safe, not because Asher was strong, but because he was gentle enough that she didn't have to be strong anymore. And as the last light of the sun melted into the horizon and the waves continued their timeless rhythm, Mia rested her head against the chest of the man she loved. And for the first time in her life, her heart belonged completely to someone who would never let it be broken again. Mia's wedding wasn't the grand fairy tale she once imagined as a little girl. There was no towering cathedral, no orchestras, no glittering chandeliers. But it was the most sacred moment of her life. Simple, elegant, and complete in a way that touched every corner of her heart. The ceremony took place at a warm, wooden lodge by Lake Tahoe. The setting looked like a painting, a still lake reflecting the soft light of an early winter sun, a circle of pine trees standing tall like nature's own chapel. Nothing was extravagant. Everything breathed intimacy. Handcrafted wooden chairs, wildflowers arranged in ceramic vases, and string lights swaying gently between the trees. Mia wore a soft, flowing white gown. Not the kind that overwhelmed the room, but the kind that made her feel wholly herself. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, untouched by heat or styling. In her hands was a small bouquet of dried roses and eucalyptus, and as she walked down the aisle lined with only her closest friends and family, every eye turned toward her. But she saw only one gaze. Asher stood at the end of the aisle in a tailored, dark suit. He didn't speak, didn't move, but his eyes never left hers. In that moment, Mia realized this wasn't the look of a man marrying a woman. This was the look of someone who had found the missing part of his soul. When she placed her hand in his warmth spread through her instantly. His fingers closed around hers, steady and certain, as if saying without words, "I'm here." All background noise fell away. The world narrowed down to two people, two heartbeats, and a peace that wrapped itself around them like a blanket. There were no scripted vows, no rehearsed speeches, just raw, unfiltered truth shared between two people who had nothing left to prove, only everything to promise. Asher spoke first, his voice low and thick with feeling. "Mia, from the very first moment I saw you, something in me stilled. I didn't know then what it was, but now I do. It wasn't attraction, it was home. I've spent my whole life walking toward you, and today I promise I'll never let you walk alone again." Mia's eyes blurred with tears, but they weren't tears of pain. They were gratitude, healing, and quiet joy. Her voice came out in a whisper, trembling. "I used to believe I was invisible. I used to wonder if anyone would ever really see me, hear me, love me for who I was. But you saw me, even the broken parts. You didn't ask for the best version of me. You chose the real one." When they kissed, there were no cheers, no clapping, just the soft rustle of wind moving through pine branches, the light hum of nature holding its breath, and the undeniable feeling that something pure had just been sealed between two souls. For Mia, this wasn't just a beginning. It was an ending to all the hiding, all the running, all the aching questions she had once asked herself. It was a return, a place she'd been searching for her whole life, and now standing beneath the open sky with the man who had held her with gentleness, fought for her with quiet strength, and loved her without condition. She knew she would never walk alone again. 3 years after their wedding, Mia's life no longer looked like a dream made of grand promises or dramatic vows. What she had now was far better. A true home, where every morning began with the laughter of her little girl, and every night ended in the warm embrace of the man who loved her with his whole heart. Their cozy wooden house in the outskirts of Napa Valley wasn't luxurious, but every corner was touched by love. The bookshelf was lined with Mia's favorite novels, and fresh flowers sat in a glass jar on the kitchen counter, the kind Asher brought home every weekend without fail. On the wall hung their wedding photo, framed in rustic wood. Mia mid-laugh, head tilted, and Asher beside her, eyes fixed on her like nothing else existed. That morning, sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting a golden glow across Mia's tousled hair as she slowly woke. Beside her, Asher was still asleep, one arm draped over her waist as if, even in dreams, he couldn't let her go. Before she could fully move, a burst of giggles echoed in the hallway. "Mommy! Daddy!" The bedroom door flew open. Their daughter, little Aria, with wild curls and a stuffed bear tucked under her arm, ran into the room with unstoppable energy. Asher groaned and pulled the blanket over his head. No way, and it's the weekend. Mia laughed, pulling Arya into her arms and pressing a kiss to her cheek. Asher gave up, sitting up with a groggy smile and wrapping both his girls in a sleepy but loving hug. All right, you two win. Mia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the same steady love that had never left her side. She looked at Asher, then at Arya, now babbling excitedly about a butterfly she saw in the garden. And in that moment, Mia realized something simple and extraordinary. She hadn't just found love. She had rewritten her entire life with it. And this time, the story was real. No more illusions, no more running, just happiness, peace, and forever.